Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 203 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. You have a great episode with a great immigration attorney with a lot of experience and who's going to share a lot of knowledge with us, Amanda Brill, coming up in a moment. But before we get started, I want to remind everybody that the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox magazine is out, issue number 2. Check it out. A lot of information from every type of immigration law you can think of. Go to immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com/magazine to check that out. Also want to thank all our sponsors, in particular DACAwise, DACAwise.com, who's always been so helpful in sponsoring the podcast and the magazine. DACAwise is the form management and case management and firm management software that's really helpful in growing. And I just got a notification that they're working with our colleague Roman Zachenko at LaborList to help get into the employment game and help with that process. So that's going to be something really neat. We'll probably discuss that with the founders soon. If you want to get extra 10% off their annual plan, go to DACAwise.com/immigration-lawyers-podcast and put the code Immigration Lawyers Podcast there to get additional discount. I think it'll help out your firm. Along with that, there's a lot of colleagues who are getting involved in immigration practice, a lot of new people, especially that listen to this podcast. And I want to let you know I do have a training course, a 12 hours plus course plus many additional hours of office hours to go over how to do a marriage case and a disability counsel processing adjustment. Just email me at info@Immigration Lawyers Toolbox if you're interested in that. ImmigrationLawyersToolbox.com if you're interested in that. I think it'll help you get involved in the immigration game and all, probably individual guidance on how to really know what's going on, because there's so much going on with immigration. But with that, let's get Amanda on. How are you doing today? Let me see. Where's the button to get you on? I forgot. Oh, hi, Amanda. How are you?
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm so glad we got to connect. I'm sure everyone listening who's a part of like a AILA listserv or just has done AILA stuff, I've seen your name before. You are very active in Rome District and just international kind of processing of immigration cases. So share some really pivotal information, interesting information on the NIE process, which you're going to get into. But before all that, who is Amanda Brill? How did you get involved in immigration?
That's a good question. I question it every day. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm actually from Boston originally, and I went to BU for law school and graduated in 2002 when the .com bubble was bursting. And I sort of scrambled to find a job that I was interested in and bounced around a little bit different fields and ended up in Revere, Massachusetts, which is an interesting place. It's not quite Boston, and was doing personal injury law and kind of looking at like what happened. In retrospect, it was about 2 years after I graduated, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. And I decided I really needed to figure out what I wanted to do. And I thought it was going to be immigration. When I had actually graduated, I looked at volunteering and immigration. And because of the market at the time, there were waiting lists to volunteer. So I rebooted myself. I met with all of the business immigration lawyers in Boston and did kind of informational interviews. They all actually seemed pretty content with their lives, which was unique for lawyers, I think. And ended up getting a job with a firm that was called Tachi Goss & Lee in Boston, and worked for them for 5 years and ultimately always wanted to move to London. And so I was very grateful that I actually chose a field of law that would allow me to practice outside of the US without, having to go through a series of exams or anything like that. And so 2010, moved to London. I did the same thing to find a job there. I met with every AILA member who was based in London and kind of got the lay of the land and intel about, it's actually a very good group. It's grown a bit since I moved there in 2010, but it's, very collegial community outside of the US in London. So people gave me like the ins and outs and ended up getting a job offer there where I worked with my partner, now law partner, Daniel Parisi. We were working for another person. We really enjoyed the business development side of it. And we ended up starting our own firm in 2011. And so it's our 10-year anniversary in November. It's been very fun. It's been very stressful, but we really love the consular side of the practice. So that's the bulk of what we do outside of the US.
And we're going to get into it. Consular processing in London is its own world. It's unique in very different ways. But you mentioned two parts about your history. One is when you want to get involved, you did these informational meetings with attorneys, and then you were able to find jobs. We have a lot of law students and people getting involved. And that's so interesting that you did that, that you had these informational meetings and just didn't start sending resumes on online websites or something. Like develop relationships. That's so important. Did those informational meetings themselves lead to finding job opportunities, or how did that connect?
Yeah, they both did, in fact. So the interesting thing with Tachi, Goss, and Lee, which we're now still partners with Tachi and Lee, they have a Cape office. They're quite hands off with us. Daniel and I really do our own thing in London, but had a very great relationship with all three of the partners there when I left. But basically, what I would do is send a resume, make a phone call, ask for an informational interview. And everybody was so willing to meet, which I think is reflective of the immigration bar. And we've seen that, through the very stressful Trump years and now the very stressful COVID years. But people would meet. And so what happened with my first immigration job was actually the partner at the firm that was hiring was employment. And he had seen that I had some experience with employment law. And so they said, we don't quite have a slot for you in immigration yet, but we've noted your interest. And so once we do, we will move you into that role. But in the meantime, we need you to do employment law, which it was like awesome. I did I was second chair in a trial for employment discrimination. I hated litigation completely, but I'm glad I got to experience all that. And then within, a few months, they've moved me over to the immigration side. And the same with London, actually. I mean, it helped. I had the ability to work in the UK. It was a different immigration system when I was looking, but that helped a lot. But I did meet with everybody. And ultimately, one of the firms that I met with was hiring and had a need for somebody because I had done some consular work within the US with ease. And I think that was sort of the selling point, that I wasn't starting from scratch when I got there.
Well, I mean, let's just jump heavy deep into it because you mentioned ease. How strict are they on the home residency requirement, the island residency for ease? Have you seen that, or has it gotten less strict, or how bad is it? I mean, for those who don't know, could you explain that requirement that's unique to the UK?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, E2s, E1s, they're all based on treaties that the US has with other countries. And so with respect to the UK, there's a special provision in the treaty that requires there to be a residency. And I forget how it's defined technically, but basically London is pretty strict about it. They have a list of documents. So it doesn't apply to any other nationalities. It's only distinct to the United Kingdom and British citizens. But they have a list of acceptable documents that they will review to confirm that you meet that requirement. If you are applying, trying to apply for an E2 for based on your British citizenship in another country, most countries won't see you, is the experience I've had. And then for London, if you've been in the US, we have several clients who've been in the US on other visa types, so O1s typically. And if they're moving to an E2, they'll accept if the last visa stamp was issued from London. So those are kind of ways that it works.
It is so tricky because, a lot of practitioners who don't know these nuanced stuff may fall foul. The client goes to the interview, gets denied. They're like, what happened? So it's really important to know the million and one things you have to know about immigration.
Exactly.
So, London is one of the biggest embassies. It's the place where consular officers, they win once they go through hard details in Pakistan or Afghanistan, they send them to London, which brings back a lot of the hard ways they adjudicate cases in those countries, and they bring it to London. So I've seen a lot of wild things happen in London. That's unbelievable. But at the same time, they're very, very professional. They had a BBC show. I'm not sure you saw it. BBC did this review. I only watched one of them, which was on the travel ban, and it made me want to cry seeing how bad they were hitting people. But they did one interesting thing is they had officers call up people who had visas just to double check to see if they left the United States or not, which is kind of weird. I didn't expect them to spend time doing something like that. But London does all sorts of stuff. Where should we start? NIEs, I guess, is the thing that people want to know about. You had sent an email referencing how the airlines are dealing with that. Could you talk about that and the backlog in NIEs right now, and what NIEs are, I guess, in general? Sorry to put you on the spot explaining all this stuff, but there's a lot going on.
I mean, it's pretty much all I've done for the last year.
You create a lot of business, which is good for business, but at the same time, it's the last kind of business you want to do. To ask NIEs is such a worthless kind of thing. You want to work on real cases, so it's so stressful.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's funny because you're absolutely right. Like we were very grateful for the work at the beginning when embassies were closed completely and travel bans were in place and a lot of borders were closed. But I mean, at this point, I think most of us who've done these for in any kind of volume for the last year are pretty burnt out. I mean, it's essentially taking on somebody else's emergency stress. and I think, again, maybe unique to immigration lawyers, but we actually do really care about our clients and we want to be successful for them. So yeah, there are a few just interesting things about London with respect to NIEs. So we're very lucky in many ways that we do have a CBP attaché at Heathrow Airport, and Heathrow Airport is I mean, I'm sure most people know it's a very large airport, a lot of international flights, and they seem to at least understand what the rules are, which I think is a benefit as compared to if people are originating flights, from smaller European airports. We've heard, pushbacks. In fact, one of my friends, her husband's Italian, was almost not allowed to board, even though he's married to a U.S. citizen, starting in Bologna, which I think I've heard other people complain about. But anyway, with Heathrow, at least we have people who have knowledge of the rules, which is good. Even if we don't like the rules, at least there's a starting point. But basically, so the email that I sent was more about my experience talking to one of the airline employees. So I think the best way for people who haven't traveled internationally in the last year to think about this, and I have traveled back and forth between the US and UK quite a bit because my husband lives in America. But all of the airlines are interpreting all of the rules for every country that they're flying to, which is crazy. I mean, so working against you, if you start in a large airport in the US, like Dallas, Fort Worth, and you're trying to check in, and one country requires this type of COVID test, one country requires this type of health insurance policy, one country requires, vaccine record, but, it's not the vaccine that we had in the US, and so on and so forth. I do have a bit of compassion for these airline employees because it's, we're already struggling with it as immigration lawyers for one country, and they're dealing with a myriad of documents that are going to be challenging at best to verify. But at Heathrow, I was talking to one of the airline employees who does sort of the final check before they allow you to board the plane. And, he was just telling me all the different scenarios that they've seen, people transiting through Heathrow who make it to the gate and then learn that they're not actually eligible to travel. They said, one of the exceptions for the travel ban is if you're, married to a U.S. citizen or you have U.S. citizen children, they don't have to be traveling with you. They have, I think they said 1 to 2 times a week, they get somebody presenting a fake document to establish that relationship, which they can actually verify from the time you check in to the time you get to the gate. So it was kind of interesting to hear, what is happening on the ground at the point of departure.
It's interesting how you can verify that, because the U.S. has this county by county marriage certificate, maybe state-based, and it's like, I don't even know how to verify that, but maybe they work with the embassy, they have a connection or something like that. And then, yeah, it's just stressful. It causes probably more delays in the airport. The last place you want to be. When I was growing up, I wanted to work in an international crew where I could travel for work and stuff like that. But once I started immigration and I traveled a little bit at the beginning, I realized how annoying it is to travel for work. And imagine having to get the airlines and deal with airports. It's just obnoxious. So that part is horrible. Now, with the NIEs themselves, requesting it from the embassy, you request them because you want to have emergency ability to come enter the United States, and you have a visa. But is it even possible to do an emergency trip? I mean, with the delays, how bad are the delays right now? And how bad are things backed up at the embassy in London?
It's probably the worst I've seen it in COVID, as far as with the embassy being, somewhat operational. So they reopened in July of last year. And that's really when people, I think, were starting to feel like they could travel if it was an emergency basis. And so that's when NIEs really started to become, part of everybody's practice. But we recently, through the AILA Rome District chapter, through the Ayla Rome district chapter. We recently had a call with the visa chief in London, and he gave us some pretty interesting statistics about the numbers they're seeing. So he said they get 2,000 to 3,000 NIE requests per week. And they're receiving, I think, 8 months of email per month in the embassy, which I think helps, when you're explaining to a client, like, this is what they're seeing, and it's very hard to get their attention. And so if you already have an existing travel document, if you're needing to travel on ESTA, or you have a visa stamp already, you're looking at about 5 months right now 5 weeks, not 5 months, 5 weeks. It's not as bad as that. 5 weeks to get your NIE approved. And so what we've started to do is, you have to make it extraordinarily clear to your client, because they're going to ask, can you chase it? They're going to ask, what else can we do? And really, you have to just be prepared to wait it out, or go to Mexico for 2 weeks. I mean, I think, that's the option we present for somebody with an existing travel document, because the only guarantee we can make is that they'll eventually get to it. We've been very successful with our requests. Most have been approved, but if somebody comes to you and they need an elective surgery in America, it's not going to get approved by London. If you'll wait 5 weeks to get that denial. And if you have the flexibility, and then the comfort level, you may as well go to a third non-banned country, or financial resources as well, because that can get quite expensive.
Now, speaking of those emails, I had someone requesting NIE from London asking for help. They had sent an email to themselves and all this kind of stuff. The email was like pretty much like 3 pages, like one big paragraph. And so the embassy is getting like thousands of these, and we all get these emails from potential clients and prospective clients. And how frustrating is when you get this? You're like, I can't read this. Like, and they're put bold, and there's emotional language in there, the frustration. So it's a lot of work that they have to go through to properly deal with it, because they still have to respond in some fashion to those people. So it's a disaster. Hopefully they just kind of open up the situation, especially in London, because it's such a hub. It's just the numbers are so extreme there. Now, kind of moving on to your personal practice, I talked with your partner, I think last year, and there was, with Brexit, talked about moving the office to Belgium and stuff like that. How are operations for you right now? I mean, how big is your office? You have additional lawyers, or is it primarily you two? And how does things look with Brexit and everything for you guys?
Sure. So, I mean, the main thing we had was the lockdown. I mean, for people who don't really understand what's happened in Europe, I mean, I fled to America at the beginning. When the travel ban started, my fiance at the time was like, you need to get on a plane and get to America. And I was like, I don't know what to do. So I, immediately came over like mid-March, of last year, and, everybody was immediately working from home. It became pretty obvious that this was going to be the case for a while. We tried to negotiate with our landlord. We're an office, to answer your question, we're an office of 6 people. And so, small, but, London office space is a premium, and nobody has a door to their office. I can tell you that.
Is it like the bar there, so you're not allowed to advertise that you're a lawyer, or did they change that in England where you can't have like even a sign outside or something?
Well, we're regulated by the New York Bar. Everybody in our firm is a member of the New York Bar. We don't deal with the solicitor's regulatory authority. But either way, I mean, we're talking about small office spaces, but real estate is a premium in central London, and so once it became clear, well, actually, once the government regulations came down, that you were not meant to work from an office, you were, at one point it was illegal to leave your house, illegal, like criminal penalties applied if you left your house in the UK for reasons that were not, essential. But we started trying to negotiate with our landlord. That was getting us nowhere. And so eventually we made the decision that we were going to, we had a licensed office, like a managed office. And so we just had a 3-month notice period and moved out. So by that point, everybody was working from home pretty well. We put, the tools in place, printers, scanners, shredders, all that stuff, and moved definitely more to an online office. But it's hard. I mean, we are paper-based. London homes are typically very small and not great for working by yourself for months on end. And so we did that for about a year. And then recently we've started going back. So I could see from a management perspective, and also having spent time in the US where, it's just so different. It's so hard to comprehend the differences because we're just so far behind in the United Kingdom with our freedoms. But I think, we decided to go back to an office, just to have our big industrial equipment where we could do the copying and the scanning, and people weren't, using smaller at-home stuff. Yeah. And just to give people a break from their houses. But with Brexit, what's been interesting with Brexit is, I think, my partner is getting European residency in Brussels. He's not been able to really come back and forth. A lot of the kind of decisions, I feel like Brexit has really come under the microscope, and the consequences of Brexit since COVID, because with travel bans, freedom of movement, all that stuff has really been restricted. On the flip side, I will say a lot of people want to leave the United Kingdom and go to America. So that's been good for business. I mean, the twofold, I think Brexit, and then also the endless lockdowns in the UK. My entrepreneur clients and my production and, like kind of people in the arts are also fed up and want to move to, America, where things are open already. So it's been an interesting fallout from both of those events.
You just mentioned the arts. Another area where I see people, actually for that, you mentioned the Rome district. For listeners, if you're a part of AILA, I really recommend, in addition to your home chapter, signing up for the Rome district chapter. It's probably the best chapter when it comes to just information knowledge. I'm part of like 10 different AILA chapters: New York, San Francisco, Chicago. I join all of them. But Rome district, content-wise, is the place to be. So I definitely recommend joining that and being active there. But you mentioned the arts. O1s are another thing that London does in mass. It's like a big thing, which leads to a lot of issues popping up. What has been your relationship with London and O1 and things you've seen?
Sure. So, I mean, it's always an evolution, and it has to do with who's in charge at the time. It's no longer such a big issue, but there was a huge, there was a period of time where anybody who was applying for an O1 was recommending not to go to London. They sort of had their unofficial "Are you Googleable?" standard. And so if you were in a public facing type role, like acting or singing or performing of some type, and you weren't Googleable, you typically were not going to get your O1 visa, despite the fact that USCIS had already approved it. Yeah. That's changed, thankfully. We don't, that supervisor has left, and we don't see that happening as much. The harder part right now is getting the interviews at all. But basically, I would say with respect to O's in London, number one is I visas, which people use historically for a lot of different purposes, many of which were probably not permissible. London has taken a very hard line on I visas. So
these are media visas?
Pardon?
Is I the media reporter?
It is, but they also can be used for production companies, independent production companies. And so there was a lot of it's a documentary. And so London really cracked down on those. So now I think from a practice standpoint, even though eyes are not subject to the travel ban, I still am cautious when it comes to some sort of, production type request, because I still have battle scars from London taking a very hard line on those. And then the other thing to mention is just that London has been very good about prioritizing people in the arts and entertainment world. Always has been. I think, obviously there's a huge synergy between the US and UK, with arts, television, film. And so that's been a blessing. Sometimes you shake your head thinking well, I've got this guy who could, solve COVID, or I've got this amazing, actor, and they'll get the actor in. But, I think it's good for the clients that we represent as far as how they're prioritized with the embassy. The other note of caution, just for current times, is O2s are much, much harder to get interviews for right now. We do see a lot of our O1s getting expedited interviews, and the O2s are sort of languishing, and often they're the more important part of the production.
Yeah. And one thing with the lack of interviews and a lot of these categories, it means the officers reviewing him kind of don't get the day-to-day practice, so they may forget, or it's just, you got to stay on top of what the rules are. Like, I have this issue with L's when I used to do a lot of L's. A lot of consular officers who are newer, didn't have experience, would find mistakes in L's that weren't correct. And so there's a lot of continuing education that happen, which is going to happen now because they're spending all their times on NIEs or something like that. So they kind of lose that education. There's a wealth of knowledge you can share. If you have more time, share anything you like. I'm here. But before we go, I wanted to find out the best way for people to contact you. If they want to reach out, if there's social media sites you put information on, it'd be great for listeners to know.
Sure. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me on social media. It's, Amanda Susan Brill. Our firm website is brillparisi.com. That's BRILL, the city of Paris with an I at the end, .com. And my email address is amanda@brillparisi.com. And I'm always checking email, regardless of whether I want to or not, but I'm typically very responsive, and we'll get back to you and let you know if we think we can help. I mean, there's certain things right now that are impossible. And I think that's unfortunately what, we see in all facets of our life, but particularly with immigration.
Okay, I want to let you get that call, but I do have just this personal question. What does the next 6 months look for you and your firm like? Are you going to be moving back to the U.S.? You said your spouse is here. Which are you going life-wise and mixed with firm-wise? Our life is our firm, essentially, the immigration part.
Well, I mean, personally, I'm really pumped to be back in our office. We found a beautiful office in Fitzrovia, which is quite a dynamic part of London, and it has air conditioning, which I always mention because it's like such a blessing when you live in a place that doesn't have the guarantee of air conditioning. But anyway, no, I mean, for me, I go back and forth between the US and UK, always have, and I love being in London. And yeah, we're just sort of making sure we ease back in safely to working from an office. We've got a lot of considerations as far as, the infection rates and that sort of thing. And so we don't want to push anything too fast. But I think, we're all kind of happy to be out of our small London flats and back together and interacting, in ways that we did, before the pandemic. So I'm excited to have our Freedom Day on Monday, which is supposed to happen. And then just kind of get as back to normal as we can, and not being stuck in our homes.
Well, you're from Massachusetts, which is still more of a smaller kind of place when it comes to housing, a lot of older stuff. I'm in Los Angeles, which is a sprawling area. Everyone, two-story houses, and that's it, not many high rises. How big is the difference when you come back to the East Coast from London? Is it still huge compared to the London's houses size?
Well, I always laugh because Boston, I was also, city. I'm a city woman. I like living in the city. I like walking everywhere. But I think, what strikes me is just, when I lived in Boston, the Northeast is always, supposed to be like the less friendly part of the country. But as compared to the customer service you get in the UK, I'm always blown away because I'm like, I used to think this was rude, but actually people in Massachusetts are really helpful as compared to London. So I love getting the benefit of going back and forth because it makes me appreciate, the good things in the US. Yeah. In COVID, I've never felt more American in my life. It really surprised me. But it's good to get that balance and going back and forth.
What is it that's drawn you to live in London? I mean, go that seriously to stay there and work on a full-time basis?
The people. I mean, the people, it's weird, but the people that are attracted to London are some of the most interesting, dynamic, fun people I've ever met. And I was very lucky because I moved there when I was like 30. Yeah, it must have been 33. And, you're an adult, you're trying to make friends. You wonder how it's going to go. You're not in graduate school anymore. I think Boston was a very difficult city once you were out of graduate school. And, I didn't want to have didn't want to have children, to make new friends. Whereas London, you've got so many different, points of interest. I'm a, patron at the Victoria and Albert Museum. I get involved in different, clubs and charities and that sort of thing. And through that, I've just made an amazing network of friends, and I don't know where else in the world I would find that. So until that, if people start moving out of the city again, maybe I'd look at coming back. But despite its challenges, and they are maddening, I have a pretty good sense of humor, and I love being there and suffering through some of the madness.
Thanks for sharing all that information. Please come back on the show whenever anything news pop up, or email me. I'd love to hear it. Stay on the line. I'm going to end the program, but just have a few minutes to talk. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Definitely check out the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox magazine. Hopefully, Amanda or Partner Associates could contribute an article in the future. We'll talk about that. But the next issue is coming out in August. It's going to be specialized just on O1A visas. All 15 articles, different aspects of O1, or even other countries doing O1 type stuff. Check it out at immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com/magazine. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.